And as I read this a little over a week ago, I thought, is Jesus hangry? Is that what's going on here? I mean, he's hungry. It says that. He sees this tree and leaf, and he finds no fruit, and he curses it. And it works. The next day, they discover it dead. And well, I guess that would be that. I mean, it's a little harsh, but I guess it's kind of understandable. A tree that's supposed to bear fruit, come on, tree, you had one job, and it's condemned. It didn't do what it was supposed to do. But there is one little line that Mark includes that kind of throws a wrench into the whole works. I don't know if you noticed it. Right at the end of verse 13, it says, "For it was not the season for figs." It wasn't the season. I mean, there's so many reasons why a plant might not produce fruit. Overwatering, underwatering, bad soil mixture, poor pruning, not enough pollinators. But none of these are the problem. What's the problem? It's not the season for figs. You know, if Mark had just left that line out, this would just be so easy for us to read through. Oh yeah, it just wasn't bearing fruit and he was supposed to. And maybe some horticulturalists would figure it out, but the rest of us wouldn't be none the wiser. But Mark wrote, "For it was not the season for figs." And with that, Jesus is left looking, I don't know, a little spiteful or hangry or destructively acting out from personal disappointment. And we think, wait, this is Jesus? Or are we missing something? Well, what if the fig tree isn't about the fig tree at all? All right, well, what's the evidence for that line of thinking? Exhibit A. Mark ties the fig tree story and the temple stories together by interweaving them. Now, this is something that Mark does throughout his gospel. We call it sandwiching. He'll have story A, then he'll bring in story B, and he'll come right back to A. And he's tying those events together for some important reason. It's a sandwich. Right here, we don't have sandwiching. We have a new phrase, Big Macking, okay? Temple, fig again, second patty, and then the temple on the bottom. The main point, therefore, is about the temple. The fig is about the temple. Another reason, Exhibit B, the fig tree was already used by the prophets symbolically. Jeremiah, Hosea, Micah all use the fig tree to refer to unfruitful Israel, and specifically the temple to condemn it. Micah in chapter 7 is searching for figs that his soul desires. He's hungry, and they can't be found. Verse 1 says, "Woe is me, for I have become as when the summer fruit has been gathered, as when the grapes have been gleaned. There is no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig that my soul desires." So the prophet Micah, he's speaking for God. He's on a search for godliness, and he compares it to what's really an unreasonable search. He's in the fall, after harvest, looking for first ripe summer fruit. Not going to find it then, Micah. And the picture is absurd, but that's the point. You see, Micah's actions are so far off that it's clearly a symbolic prophetic demonstration, just like Jesus's. See, the demonstration showed that there was no godly, there was no upright. In fact, it wasn't even close. So Jesus, yes, he's horticulturally unreasonable, but metaphorically he's on point. He's agriculturally suspect, but symbolically strong because it's prophetic. And then Exhibit C, finally, Mark's own words should have tipped us off in the beginning when he wrote, "For it was not the season for figs." See, this was Mark's clue to the reader to look beyond the surface to the symbolic, because Jesus isn't irrational. He's making a statement, purposefully, a demonstration that will then apply to his actions in the temple. You see, the temple appears like it would be fruitful. It's full of leaves, and it's making a promise of fruit, but it has no fruit at all. It's barren, and it's going to stand condemned. And so the temple helps us understand the fig helps us understand Jesus' actions at the temple. So we want to read those next, verse 15. "And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, 'Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a den of robbers.' And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. So Jesus goes to the temple. This is the center of Israel's religious life and the symbol of its national identity. Nothing was a bigger deal to the people than the temple. Now, following Jesus' demonstration at the fig tree, he's now taking part in another demonstration, a protest. And it's not to cleanse it, it's not to reform it, but it's to condemn it, just like the tree. And he does so by attacking these necessary commercial functions of the temple. Animals had to be bought and sold. Money had to be changed. These were not bad things in and of themselves, though there might have been some price gouging going on. Think of trying to get a sandwich at the airport, that kind of thing. But the real issue appears to be this twofold criticism of the temple's one job. The first criticism I call missional drift. Now, the purpose of the temple reflected the purpose of the people of Israel. Since the time of Moses, the tabernacle first, then the temple, was the place where God would specially dwell with his people. It was a place of relationship, of worship, of prayer, of sacrifice, and a place of seeking forgiveness. Well, this is the central symbol for a people whose job was to be a priesthood to the nations. They had one job. Now, the temple in Jesus' time, you can see illustration there, was massive. Herod the Great had sought to really expand and double the amount of area the entire complex is, while still staying true to the design of the temple proper in the middle. Now, the outermost area of the old temple complex was an area known as the Court of the Gentiles. You can see it in red there. And this was the farthest that a non-Jew could go and still participate in prayer. Now, beyond this area, on the southern side, there was a huge colonnaded structure called the Royal Stoa. This was a marketplace. Most of the year, this is where the selling of the animals, the exchanging of the money into the right currency would happen. However, according to archaeologist Lane Rittmeyer, he says that during special festivals, these massive ones, when tons of people would come to Jerusalem, ones like Passover, extra tables and market stalls would then get set up and pushed into the court of the Gentiles and get in the way. So Jesus, he's quoting Isaiah 56, a chapter that really extends God's heart for all the nations, all the people, and he shows that it's not okay. It's not okay for their commercial activities that served only the Jewish people to get in their way of their mission to the nations. They've drifted from what they're supposed to be about, and that's a problem. However, really, this problem is only symptomatic. It's one symptom of a second greater problem. I call that deep-rooted decay. See, it hasn't just drifted. It's dead inside. You see, if the problem was only that during those high holidays, the temple merch spilled over into the prayer areas, Jesus could do a little cleaning, you'd maybe get a petition, a bunch of signatures, enact some changes. But it was more than that. He says, you've made it a den of robbers. That's not actually a challenge to the price gouging. He's not saying there's robbing happening here. He's saying this is the place that the bandits return back to. It's their cave. It looks like a place of prayer, but it's a hideout, a refuge for evil. And here Jesus is again quoting a prophet, Jeremiah in chapter 7, a chapter where God accuses the people that they steal and murder and commit adultery and swear falsely and worship other gods and then just show up to the temple like everything is A-okay. And it's not okay. And again, Jesus is pointing out, in the very place that God gifted them with the unique and special treasure, that most unique above all, his presence, a place to meet with him and to know him and to be known by him. In that place with a mission to mediate that blessing to the world, they've turned it into a disgrace. Living for themselves, using the temple to put on a facade of holiness, a veneer of godliness. The temple was like the fig tree. A leafy promise of fruit, but it had none. It was fruitless, it was barren, and it didn't just need cleaning, it needed to be condemned. And so when the next morning comes and the disciples discover the fig tree has withered up and died, it's a confirmation that the temple's time is done. I want to pause for a moment on the temple. And though the temple of Jesus' time and the Christian church are very different, I do want to recognize sometimes that the institution of the church as an organization, we can fall into some of those same temptations. Mission drift. When a church becomes so inward focused of just taking care of our own needs, our own preferences, that we fail to be a disciple-making force that seeks the lost of the world. We had one job. Or what about deep-rooted decay? When we become so accustomed to the church as this kind of just thing that we do that all week we can live however we want, chase after whatever we desire, and then just show up to church for about an hour, and then that makes it all okay. See, Jesus' demonstration, and ultimately it's not closely related to selling concert tickets on the patio or hosting a boutique on the property. It's looking like we're religious and godly while being fake and dead inside, bearing no fruit. That's not a happy thought. But we have one job. A week ago, my family was at the Segerstrom concert hall in Costa Mesa, because my kids just love the symphony. No, it's because it was the music of Star Wars, and if you know anything about the film score of these movies, there's one name that just dominates the writing of these songs, and that's John Williams. He's just one of Hollywood's just most preeminent composers in the last 50, 60 years. Incredible gift. Well, the conductor that was there that night told a lot of different stories, but he told one story about John Williams. That when John Williams was contacted by Disney to do the music for their new trilogy as they were getting the machine started up again, he said he would just do the first movie. You know, he's just getting into his 80s, and he would do one. But after he wrote a particular song, it's called Ray's Theme. It's the main song for the heroic new character that they had started in the films. He fell in love with the song so much that he went back to him and said, I'll do the other two movies as well. Because he didn't want anyone else to get their hands on that song, that theme, and ruin it. It was so precious to him. It was his treasure. He loved it and wanted to take care of it himself. I was thinking about that when I was thinking about why is Jesus' reaction to the temple just so harsh? And I think it's because God had gone beyond what a John Williams or any of us would do, and God had entrusted his presence, his temple, his relationship to the nation of Israel. They were to be a kingdom of priests to the nations, his house to be a house of prayer to the nations. They had one job, to bear fruit. And they didn't. And they didn't just fail or make a mistake. I mean, they profaned the treasure of God, meaning maybe God was better off just taking it back, keeping it to himself rather than entrust it to anyone else. But if he's taking the temple away, well, God, what's the plan? Do you still have a plan for any people to be fruitful, or is it just we're done with that? Well, as we continue in the chapter, it's the next morning. Jesus and his crew are headed towards the temple. And they pass by the fig tree again and see that it's died. And that helps to complete the picture, like I said, of Jesus' temple protest. But it also leads into a new discussion about God's plan. Continuing in verse 20. It says, and as they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered and said, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered. And Jesus answered them, have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. The disciples are really focused on this miracle of the fig tree. And Jesus aims to reset what they're looking at, reset their expectations, and says essentially, if you think that's amazing, I want to let you in on how without the temple, God is still planning to entrust you, my followers, with the ability to bear fruit for the kingdom of God. And Jesus is going to lay out 3 essential components to fruit bearing.